We're going to do a series on the seven churches found in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, the seven churches of Asia. And my hope is that as we go through this, maybe some background information that you weren't aware of, and it'll help you to better appreciate. We'll go through the history of the church as far as given in the scriptures, so maybe that'll help you have a better appreciation again of what you're reading. And also, I have found that whenever you're looking at these seven churches, there's a lot of subtle references to historical events, things that are happening at that time, and the more that you learn about either their geography or what is happening, it sheds a little bit of light. But more importantly, more than anything, we're going to learn what it is that I think is common, something that can happen to churches, and ultimately churches are made up of individuals. So ultimately, what can happen to me and what can happen to you? And we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's essentially what you see in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. And today we're beginning with the church of Ephesus. And even though it isn't the most popular church, when you think about the most popular church in the first century, your mind would go to Jerusalem just because of its location and all the history surrounding it. But actually, we have more information about the church of Ephesus than we do of any other congregation. So I've got quite a bit of information. We're just going to hit the ground running. Good luck. So these are so cheesy. I know, especially Joe will always ask, is the picture accurate? No, none of these things are accurate, but here's at least something that the artist is trying to portray maybe what John sees, this vision of Jesus. He hears this voice, he turns around, we're in Revelation chapter 1. Okay, John, the apostle of God, is on the island of Patmos. He hears this voice, he sees this image of Jesus. I'm in Revelation chapter 1, if you want to look at that. Verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. He sees this figure, this one, and this long robe, white hair, fire in his eyes, face shining like the sun, a sash really around his chest, it says. That's not a goatee, that's actually a sword that's supposed to be coming out of his mouth there. He's standing in the midst of these seven lampstands, and in his right hand he's holding seven stars. And the text will tell later, Jesus will say, hey, the lampstands are the churches. Look, I'm in Revelation chapter 1, verse 20. Jesus says, as for the mystery of the seven stars that you saw in my right hand and the seven golden lampstands, the seven stars are the angels of the seven churches, and the seven lampstands are the seven churches. And so before it starts getting into all this, imagery, and we especially think about chapters 4 and on, you have a message for Christians about something that must soon take place. I firmly believe that pretty much everything you're reading, if not everything in Revelation, has already occurred as far as today. But the principle behind this revelation, the principle of good and evil, the principle of persecution, everyone can relate to this message. That's why Revelation is so powerful. And so he begins with these seven churches. You're going to have some patterns if you're taking note. I'm not going to bring this up every time we look at a congregation, but for the beginning, if you're interested, you've got, again, these seven churches. He begins with Ephesus. What's interesting about it is that if you look at a map, you're going to see, and I'll show you in just a moment, it kind of has a clockwise pattern to it. And this is a route that a courier would have taken. If you were to deliver mail, a message to someone from Patmos, it would go in this circular pattern. Were there only seven churches in Asia? That's modern Turkey at this time. But at that time, no. We know that Areopolis existed, Troas. We believe that Colossae may have been around. They suffered greatly by an earthquake in AD 60, AD 61. And they never fully recovered, so it could be by the time that he has this revelation, they no longer exist. But we know other churches did. So why 7? And we believe that it's an apocalyptic number. Jews, whenever they used the number 7, it was that idea of completion or perfection. And if that's what's going on, then what you have is you have a message to, yes, these 7 churches, literally, but really it's a message to the body. It's something that everyone could read. Whenever this was circulated, Ephesus would have read Jesus' instruction to them and everyone else. And so we're all learning together. He describes himself, and it points back to some description in chapter 1. So what I mean by that is, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write, the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Well, you've already read about that in chapter 1. So it either ties back to something Jesus said or how John described him. That's one of the patterns that you see. Another thing is that he says, I know. To every 7 churches, he says, I know, and then he'll tell us what it is. There's nothing that gets past Jesus is the point. There's comfort and commands from the diagnosis. And then, of course, there's the expectations to hear what he has to say, to obey it. And he has a blessing. And in every church, it talks about the one who conquers, and then it'll have some reference, and we'll get to that. So there's kind of a pattern that it keeps to all 7 churches. This is a map, so I know that's hard to see. There's Patmos right there. And then look, there's Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So you see that it kind of goes around. They're saying that's kind of the pattern there, and that's what a courier would have taken at that time. Kind of neat. Itself, Ephesus. It was a gateway to Asia, most important seaport on the west coast. It was the major city of the Roman province of Asia, so heavy hitter in Asia. It was the 4th largest city of the whole Roman Empire, a population of about 200,000 people at that time. It's a commercial center. It was given the title the supreme, if I could talk, metropolis of Asia. It's where all classes of people met, lived, carried on trade. A lot of cool features about the city of Ephesus. You have the amphitheater, for example, but the main focus was this temple dedicated to Artemis. And it was actually one of the 7 wonders of the world at that time. One brother put it this way. He says, in all likelihood, the temple began around a meteorite that fell to earth. Now here's what's interesting. Look really quickly at Acts chapter 19. Acts 19, verse 35. So we're going to get to this, but Paul is in Ephesus, and a crowd is assembled in the amphitheater. Verse 35, when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis, and the sacred stone that fell from the sky? So what they think, and I'll continue reading this, that the temple began around a meteorite that fell to earth and resembled the figure of a woman, probably became associated with the fertility goddess before the Greek invasion, and was later identified with Artemis. The temple was, again, one of the 7 wonders of the world, 360 feet long, 180 feet broad, an impressive sight. So it's always neat, right? Whenever you're looking at the history of it. Here's the amphitheater here. It would hold about 25,000 people. That's if you're looking at the stage. They'd have performances or sometimes religious gatherings or civil councils there. Isn't that crazy? And I'm just thinking about how amazing that is, but to think that that's not what they were known for. They were known for the temple. So this city was a heavy hitter. Lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different story. And then Jesus is introduced to these people. And he's much bigger and much important than anything that was going on in Ephesus. And so here's the history. If you're looking at Acts 18, and obviously I'll be going through this very quickly. In Acts 18, beginning in verse 19, you're going to have Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila enter Ephesus. Paul's going to reason in the synagogue. He's asked to stay, but he decides to leave, and he leaves behind Aquila and Priscilla. And then as you carry on into the chapter, then Apollos enters in. Paul had a lot of information about Jesus, a lot of information concerning the way, but Aquila and Priscilla, you remember, take him to the side, teach him more accurately the way of the Lord. The brothers, and that's interesting. So already it talks about the brothers are encouraging Apollos to leave to Achaia, to travel. So that means that the work already that Paul and Aquila and Priscilla had begun, there's now Christians there, or that could have maybe had a reference all the way back to Acts 2, whenever the gospel spread. Maybe there was a few people that were already disciples, but they're encouraging him as he's going to leave. In Acts 19, about 2 years later, Paul returns to Ephesus, and he finds some disciples. He asks them if they've received the Holy Spirit. Remember, they're like, we've not even heard there is a Holy Spirit, right? We find out they were only familiar with the baptism of John. Paul corrects them. They're baptized in the name of Jesus. He teaches for 3 months in the synagogue, but then he moves to the hall of Tyrannus for 2 years. And it says all of Asia ends up hearing the gospel message, both Jew and Greek. And Paul will tell the elders in Ephesus how he was with them, he says, for 3 years. So he was there for either a little bit longer or kind of rounding it up to 3 years. But he came back again 2 years later. And then we start reading about some of these things that occurred. Like Paul's performing all these miracles. And think about it. If you're in Ephesus and things like Paul would take a handkerchief and it would be passed to people. And if you held on, if you touched the handkerchief, you were healed. They were seeing that kind of stuff happen in Ephesus. They saw these 7 Jewish exorcists. They were sons of the Jewish high priest named Siva. And they try to basically cast out a demon, and it's like funny, not funny, but the demon says, so Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you? And so overtakes the men. They're running out of the house naked and wounded. And everyone in that town ends up hearing about it. Then you have people that practice magic arts. They're hearing the truth. They're coming. They're repenting. They're burning all of their books. You remember that? And the word is spreading, and the church is more powerful than anything in Ephesus. And it's growing. It fueled these people. There's a fire in these people. A change is being made. Their lives are totally being dedicated to the Lord. Then we learned of Demetrius, a silversmith. He's looking at this and he's like, well, they're talking about their one God, and this doesn't sound good for us. And we're paying the bills because we're making all these little idols dedicated to Artemis, so this isn't good. And he gets all of his buddies and starts working up the crowd. And all of them all Ephesus, they make their way to the amphitheater. There's people that are there, they don't even know why they're there, the text says. They've taken disciples, now they're in their hands. Paul's trying to get in. Paul was so well respected among the Ephesians that even the city's council, their leaders, were saying, Paul, you may want to stay out of this one. Town clerk comes, quiets everyone down, and says, listen, you're really going to be charged with a riot. If there's an accusation, then let the silversmith and these craftsmen bring it and let it be done the right way. But we need to disperse. And so then what Paul does is he calls for the disciples there, he encourages them, and he departs. And we believe from the text never to see Ephesus again. That's it. He'll never return to Ephesus. He'll talk about his time in Ephesus to the church at Corinth, how he had fought with beasts. We believe he references it in 2 Corinthians 1, 8, and 10. that it seemed that his time there seemed to be a death sentence. So we can get a picture of how intense the persecution and the pressure was while he was there. I mean, could you imagine a lot of the stories over those 2.5, 3 years that he was preaching the word of God in that environment? In Acts chapter 20, this is around, we believe, AD 58. He's in Miletus, and he calls for the Ephesian elders to come to him. He doesn't go back into Ephesus. And what he tells them there is, I love you guys. I want you to remember how I labored among you for those 3 years. He also warns them that even there's going to come wolves from among you. And he tells them that you're never going to see my face again. You remember that whole scene. You have the letter that he writes to those to the saints in Ephesus. We believe that's around 60 to 62 AD. Seems like it's a good group. He has instruction, but there's no rebukes in that letter. He'll talk about the glory of God found in Jesus Christ and the plan of salvation from before the foundation of the world. He'll talk about hope in Christ. He'll talk about family and marriages and father and mother and children and slave and bondservants. He'll talk about the armor of Christ. Really positive letter. He loved this congregation. You got 1st and 2nd Timothy, a lot about Ephesians. Timothy was left in Ephesus, and so he's encouraging Timothy, listen, this is what's expected of you. This is how you need to behave in the household of God. Here's information about the household of God, how you need to conduct yourself. Here's information about elders and deacons. Here's information on how you need to handle false teachers. And he also has an expectation, and think about this, more than likely, there were probably elders at the church then, at that point still, that had met with Paul in Miletus, people that he had said goodbye to. So he knows how they need to be behaving themselves, and also if they needed more shepherds, what kind of men they need to be. And then finally, we come to Revelation chapter 2, 1 through 7. So I wanted to put this in there because we're trying our best to understand the setting of the time of a letter. Traditionally, and I don't, there's for a long time been a debate. If you hear a guy talking about Revelation, they say, are you an early or later date guy? What they mean about that is, do you believe that the revelation given to John, and whenever it was recorded, do you believe that that was before AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem? And therefore, does the message have to do with the destruction of Jerusalem? Or are you a later date guy? In other words, do you believe that it was probably written in the later mid-90s, and it has to do with the fall of Rome? Me today, I tend to think that it's probably about the fall of Rome. I wouldn't get into any arguments about this. I do think there's internal evidence for that. I think it's worth mentioning too, when you go back and you're looking at non-biblical material and you're looking at secular writers or religious guys or forefathers, they all attribute it to a later date during the time of Domitian. The only reason why I want to bring that up is that if that is the case, then you're dealing with the church that's a few decades old now, and you've got a new generation of people that are coming in. So something to keep in mind. You guys awake? You guys with me? I told you I'm going to go through this stuff. But my hope is that, that's fast, but do you kind of have some feel and some picture for Ephesus? That's who these people were. And so now you get into the text, and this part actually goes a lot quicker. I don't want you to be excited about that, but it does go a little quicker. And so now, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write, the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Already talked about the description. Something kind of interesting that I found? Listen to me, that's a big IF. If this is written in the mid-90s, there is a really good possibility that this is a reference to something that was common at that time because, and I'll just read this to you, a silver denarius minted by the Emperor Domitian to commemorate the death of his infant son. His wife, Domitia, appears on the obverse. So here she is. On the reverse side, and now here we're looking at this baby. So on the reverse, the defied child sits on the globe and reaches out with his hands to the 7 stars, representing the sun and the then known planets. The inscription on the reverse reads, "The divine Caesar, son of the Emperor Domitian." Now, you got to understand that at that time, so backing up in Roman history, the emperors, they weren't all about this leader deity thing. That was coming from the east, and they thought it was weird. But as time went on, and they began to attribute deity to their leaders, they're like, well, maybe it's not so bad. And so as time goes on, now these emperors were gods. And by that time, what you have is you have the death of this child, and he commemorates it on the silver coin. And if you're Roman, you're seeing this thing. It's out there. It's being circulated. And on the back side, it's got this child raising up with its arms with the seven stars. And it just makes me wonder if the timing is correct, if that was a little bit of nod that Jesus says, let me tell you about the true Son of a God who holds the stars in his right hand. That would be me. But I'm not going to lose sleep. It could be, at the end of the day, a big old coinkydink. So there you go. All right. Verse 2 and 3, and then I'd like to read verse 6. I know your works. Okay, so remember that pattern? I know. He says, I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil, but have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and found them to be false. I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. Look at verse 6. Yet this you hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. I'm going to come back to the passage before, but who doesn't want to be a member of this congregation, right? They are known for their service, not just about what they teach, but I know your work, I know your toil, I know what you do. I would assume they're benevolent people. And I know that you got backbone. I know that you stand for the truth. I know that you have stood up against those who try to be something they're not, tested the spirits, and these things aren't always easy to do. I know you hate the work of the Nicolaitans. Nicolaitans, the New Testament gives us literally no information. It's mentioned twice, just in passing. I'm not going to read through this. I'm going to have this posted to the website, so the PDF will be available. Tradition says, many people of old said that it actually started with Nicholas in Acts chapter 6, who had a beautiful wife, and there were those that were jealous of his wife, and he essentially just said, well, okay, well, I'll give her to you if whoever's willing to marry her. And that this started this ripple effect, and that these people were kind of they started marrying each other's wives. And so as it carried on, like to be a Nicolaitan was an insult. You'll have some like Clement of Alexander that will confirm, and he's like from the 2nd century, and he goes, yeah, no, that is what's being circulated, but I don't think that it was accurate, or I think they misunderstood. Here's the point, kind of interesting, we don't know. We don't know, but I kind of nerd out, and I also just want to share that in case you come across it. Well, there it is. So they're doing all these wonderful things, but then look at this. Verse 4. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. And so you're familiar with this, right? If you know a little bit about, like, if I were to say, do you remember what he says about Laodicea? You know, do you remember what he said about Ephesus? This is going to be the one. Yeah, this is the one that had abandoned their first love. Was it love for one another? Was it love for Christ? That could have been it. Could have been all of it. Was it losing their zeal? And it seems a lot of people have that sense that maybe that's kind of what's going on. They're doing all these things, but the motivation and the power, the passion is now missing. This one brother said they were straight as a gun barrel theologically and spiritually just as empty. And I thought that was a stellar way of putting that. If this is written in the mid-90s, what happened? You got a new generation. You have someone that comes into the United States that comes from hard times and poverty, and they come to the United States and they see all the blessings found here. And then they have children, and what happens to those children many times? They take it for granted. And now you've heard this before. I think you've probably heard this, that God doesn't have any grandchildren. You ever heard that statement? The Bible just talks about God's children. It doesn't talk about his grandchildren. Listen, you're the child of God, and you're in the family, and you appreciate who he is and what he's done. You don't have any grandbabies in that. The reality is, sometimes we just become spiritually spoiled. I'm not going to be long-winded about this. You know what I'm talking about. How many of us suffer? We become entitled. We just think that this thing is expected. And so Jesus is addressing this. And here's his instruction. He says, "Remember therefore from where you have fallen. Repent and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent." Jesus says, if you, what? You will keep my commandments. It is not true to say that you love Jesus whenever you don't obey him. Would you agree with that? But here's a challenging statement. It is also not true to say that anyone who obeys Jesus clearly loves him. Would you agree with that? Because that's what Jesus is saying. You're obeying the things that I told you to do, but you're not doing it in love. In your marriage, for example, you can be doing all the right things, but yet it just doesn't seem right. Does that make sense? God's not a robot. If you notice these things, if these things don't get past you, do you think they get past Jesus? He just doesn't want some technical agreement with you. He wants a real relationship. Which, by the way, I've been thinking, how did Ephesus as a group show this? Well, this is realistically carried out by individuals, which then begs me to wonder, did one member act a certain way, which then affected another member, which it affected another member? Did they have an environment of listen, just do? So that's something that, yes, we as a congregation want to learn from, but more importantly, I think practically, is something that you need to remember. It doesn't matter who's around you. You know what you do in a marriage whenever it's suffering? You remember. You go back to old memory lane. You see the brothers, you see the wife coming down the aisle, right? You remember what it was like to be without her. You repent of that mindset, and you start doing. And maybe even if you're not changing what you do, right? Same works but different motivation. You're changing the love behind it. Sisters, I just ask you to shake your head. Do you think you could tell the difference between your husband serving you in a certain way with love or without love? Do you think you'd be able to pick up on the difference? And we're married to Jesus. Are we not? Okay. Verse 6, when he says that you also hate the work of the Nicolaitans, I wanted to mention this to be fair to the text, the order. Having said that, and Jesus rebukes him, he goes back and he compliments him. He says, but you do hate the work of the Nicolaitans. And what I took home from that is listen, whenever there's truly something good to say it. Jesus didn't only see the issues. He was fair and he saw everything in totality. And then finally here it is in verse 7. I appreciate your patience. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Remember we talked about that last week? You can have ears but not hear. You can have eyes but not see. The heart grows dull and cold. Turn, Jesus says, and I will heal. And what he does, he gives a throwback to the garden seed, to the tree of life. And so what he's doing is, I think he's encouraged them, listen, choose life or don't. Make a decision. Take a hold of what I offer or don't. So there it is. So, I guess just leave you with this. This week, even if there's not repentance that's required, would it be good to remember this week? Let's remember. Let's remember where we come from. Let's remember the darkness that we were in. Let's remember what Jesus did. Oh, I know. No. Remember. Because if you take that I know attitude, you end up like in Ephesus. You end up with bad marriages. You end up with bad families. You end up with bad lives. Because you've forgotten what it is to appreciate what has been done for you, the thing that you could not do yourself. And then finally, let's continue to encourage to make an environment in which we as a whole remember, repent, and do.